Welcome, global community, global people, to Chaps, many cultures. How are you this morning, or afternoon, or middle of the night, or whatever time of day it is in your corner of the world? Brett, how's your corner of the world?
It's early, fine and dandy, and it's a beautiful day. Just a sensational day. As always, every day is a good day.
Every day is a good day. Interesting. All right. So you never talk about things that are not fine and dandy. Would you let us know if it was not a beautiful day?
I would absolutely let you know.
Okay. So you wouldn't hold back.
No, I wouldn't hold back. No. Well, maybe I would.
Now, if it were so bad that it would affect me in a negative way, would you rein yourself in?
Yes.
Okay. To protect my feelings or to protect you from my response?
That's a bit. Well, I think a bit of both.
Okay.
And yeah, actually, I think that's a great question. I think it is a little bit of both. So I would exercise correctness in whatever context I can understand it. I'm obviously humble enough to know that I don't know everything, and I am going to probably make mistakes in some of my communications. And that may cause me stress. That's fine. Because that makes me uncomfortable, and in the realm of discomfort comes growth.
All right. I agree. Now, would you say that there is a fine line or a distinction between being mindful of other behavioral standards and cultural expectations, so to say, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, being politically correct? Are these two things from the same basket or from the same shelf, or do they live in different parts of the store?
Well, I will set this up and say that when working with participants going to another country, perhaps going and living there for a period of time for an assignment, the question is many times when I ask them what they want to get out of the session that we're going to spend together is that, please tell me how not to make a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
And quite frankly, I will tell them, well, I'm just going to close my computer now, and we may as well just go to the bar or something and have a regular old discussion, because you are going to make mistakes, you are going to screw up, and you better get comfortable with it. Part of this experience is being comfortable, uncomfortable, and just embracing the mistakes that you make.
Right.
But there is a sense that you have the opportunity to learn. You have the opportunity to at least prepare yourself in some way, shape, or form for some of the things that your actions or words may inflict upon your hosts, because they are your hosts. So I always feel that is the very least you can do. Understanding that many people that we work with go to places where maybe assignees are common, so the local people might give them some grace. But I come from a culture that can be fairly sarcastic, and the humor can be often dark and often self-inflicted, because I come from a culture that is usually humble. We teach each other to be humble, and through humility, a good way to do that is self-deprecation.
Mm-hmm.
So self-deprecation can often come in looking at your own culture, looking at your own way and making fun of it. But does that mean other people have the right to make fun of it? Right. And so that's, to me, that's always the conundrum.
Yeah.
In some cultures, it's okay. So in some, it's certainly not, and can cause friction.
Now, when we talk about this across cultures, right now, for those of you who are listening, it sounds like we're talking about different cultures in different places of the world. So when we address the question of political correctness, and let me throw up the kind of dictionary definition there that I found this morning. If we're talking about political correctness within a group, as homogenous or non-homogenous it may be, political correctness is in my understanding, it goes a little bit beyond the mindfulness of other behavioral norms in other cultures. It actually sets a somewhat arbitrary default of what is appropriate within our group, and that default may evolve over time, as it has in many countries. When we talk about political correctness, what is okay to say, and what do people accept as terminology? And to me, it appears that the mindfulness needs to take into account the context in which the communication happens. So it's a difference whether it's you, an Australian, and me, a German, and maybe somebody from Hong Kong and somebody from Dubai, and let's throw in Sao Paulo for the mix. If we're having a conversation, then we will be on our tippy toes, ideally, and be very mindful of our respective communicative preferences. Now, if we're within one group that finds themselves in a context of a common goal or common task, then political correctness can take shapes and forms that are often not self-explanatory to the outsider. And I was reminded of this just very recently, and some of you may have seen a news piece around this. There was a lecturer or professor at a university in the United States on the West Coast. I actually forget what the university was. And he was teaching on the topic of, I think, linguistics. So it was a language lecture. And the instructor gave various examples from different languages around the world, how they use filler words. So these words like or like and you know, and so many of us, when we are looking for our train of thought, where we try to connect the dots in our head, we mindlessly often spurt out those filler words. And funny enough, most languages have that, and they're not always the same. And this instructor gave an example from, or gave many examples, and one was from Mandarin Chinese. I guess he used an example from simplified Mandarin, so what is generally spoken throughout most of the People's Republic of China. And he gave an example of a filler word that in English translates as that. So the word that in simplified Chinese apparently sounds a little bit like a derogatory term in English, like the N word. So he gives this lecture in the US. So that's the context. So context number one is university setting. Context number two is the setting is happening in the United States. And context number three is we're talking about languages and structure and logic and semantics of a language. So he brings out an example, or many examples, illustrating that case. So far, so good. The political correctness popped up when, I don't know exactly who it was, maybe students or other observers of that lecture took offense to the professor using the Chinese word, which to American ears or English native speaking ears sounds like the N word, and they accused or assumed bad intent. And here's where I think our cultural work comes in. I teach my clients that every human behavior is based on a positive intent. I don't know. Do you do something similar, Brett?
Pretty much, yeah. That's what I assume of others anyway, in terms of my directions, yes.
Right. So if we assume positive intent, then if we experience a behavior that we don't like or that we have a hard time understanding, it's upon us, the receiver of the message or the receiver of the behavior, to be a detective and find out what might be the positive intent behind this behavior that is so unusual, unfamiliar, uncommon to me, right? Mm-hmm. So in this case, political correctness kicked in, and those who found the professor's use of a Mandarin word, not an English word, a Mandarin word, offensive enough to report the man, which eventually led to his suspension. I don't know what the current situation is, if he was reinstated or not. However, the political correctness and the power that it wields sometimes led to a career decision for a person who was sharing his expertise within the context that I outlined earlier. So is this political correctness going too far? Is this where we, as cultural practitioners, would have to weigh in and say, wait a second, you're getting things confused here? What's your take on this?
Yeah, the devil's in the debrief. So it happened. He did it. It's I've heard it before. I've had that discussion about that very word and other fillers. In there are things that, you know, as a performer, I sing things in different languages, and I can tell you in the Māori language when I sing the New Zealand national anthem on behalf of our Pacific brothers and sisters. There is a word, there is a phrase in there that sounds like the F word, and you know, I find myself softening it when I sing it, but I shouldn't. It is part of the language. It is an integral part, and it is because it is a native language of the country. So I think, yes, definitely that. Just a personal opinion, I think that example you shared is just going too far. There is the intent that this person is educating people, doing what we do, right? We're trying to educate people in a way, not anywhere near the context of political correctness. I think what the intent is important, because how many times do we hear people say, well, I hate political correctness because you're not allowed to offend anybody anymore. And my question always is to them, well, let's get a piece of paper and compare notes, and you write down all the people you want to keep offending.
Mm-hmm.
And then it becomes a mirror on them. So it's not about their free speech. It's not about their freedom of expression. It's just their intent to offend people.
Right.
And to me, that's problematic.
I agree. And so would it be a jump to a conclusion to assume that the instructor was intentionally offending or insulting a minority group in North America? By the way, the professor was white, so that maybe that adds to the context.
Right.
So, would it be? I mean, I'm trying to see this from multiple angles, right? We're living in times in North America that are highly charged, especially around the topic of ethnic inequalities and just injustices around many marginalized and disadvantaged groups. So before that backdrop, a white instructor is choosing a word for his lecture that could be misinterpreted. His inclusion of that example in his lecture can be misconstrued, whether he wanted it or not. So it would have been smarter for the professor to choose a different example.
Well, even the pronunciation of the word is a variation. It doesn't really sound like the word that they're accusing of saying. It's not spelt like that in the English phonetics. So it's the way, because I spoke to a Chinese colleague of mine, and they said, yeah, well, we've heard that's happened before, but it's kind of like we say it so quick. It's when you say it quickly. So again, it's the context of the delivery. People, native Mandarin speakers, can speak very quickly. I think anybody is in their native language can do that. So it can change. And of course, it's probably a regional accent thing too, you know.
Right.
So when you get to the point where the regional accent makes it sound very much so, or in another context makes it completely different. I always just kind of come to I try to make it simple. There are examples in one particular part of the world, which I often work with the signees going to, where social media, just the expression on social media of somehow making some critical statement about infrastructure, like the trains, has caused careers to be destroyed in that country because it's been known public. So we just do the little things like say, be very careful about what you share on social media. So in the Western kind of construct that we live in, we might have a visceral response to that and say, but this is free speech, so therefore why can't I share it? And why do people get so upset about describing the state of the subway in this country? Well, I don't know. I can't answer that question, but that's what they do, and I think that we need to be respectful of it.
Now, again, we're talking about different legal, social, cultural norms in different parts of the world, that's a different context, right? So that's where I would not put that in the political correctness basket. That is something that is, well, you follow the rules, or you adhere to the rules of the group that you enter. Now, in a domestic or in a in-group setting, I would argue that a university class or college group that studies on around the same topic, that's a common shared interest group, or multiple shared interest group, so that there's a different context for that type of communication. Now, I'm not taking sides here. I've been reading over this story for multiple times, and I could find myself to come to agree with those who accuse the professor of handling the situation in not in the proper way, because of what's going on in the United States right now. So context is king here. On the other hand, I would argue that, well, if you're a college student, no matter what age and of what generation and what ethnic background, you come to that class for a reason, and you understand under which pretext this communication happens. So it's a little bit far-fetched maybe to draw the conclusion that you did. So it's a double-edged sword. So political correctness can be weaponized, as we can see here, right? It can be used to further someone's agenda, or to play into identity politics, which we have seen a lot of in the Western societies, not just the United States, for many years. So that people are playing on the emotional heartstrings of many different societal groups for their political or economic gain, because they understand what they're doing by choosing words or expressions that may or may not trigger certain responses. So words have power, people. Use your words wisely, and deliberate which words you want to use and how they might affect people. And if they do, just like Brett said, you're going to screw up. I'm going to screw up. I screwed up I continue to screw up so many times. Just ask my wife.
And as our good friend Kelly McLeod Chingan says, how it is received is the most important thing. It doesn't matter your intent. And that's for me the point of the discussion. Sometimes you will say something that you unintended. So I think in this case, a professor, you should have been given the chance and to listen. And I'm sure he probably would be happy to do that and listen to how it was received, right? For some people. And I'm sure that he would have said, okay, that's a good point. I probably should avoid that. Especially when it's not, because this was online. Everybody's learning online right now. So it was online, so it was public. I think in a lecture room, it probably wouldn't have gone any further. But because it was found online, right? And so I think, but Kelly, and I always go back to this, it doesn't matter your intent. It matters how it's received. But then to be able to be humble enough and say, okay, then please tell me how I might phrase that differently, how I might use another example. And then anybody who's got positive intent of calling you out for something will generously say to you, yes, that kind of offended me, but here's some tips that I can offer you. And unless we're grown up enough to have that open conversation, which is hard to have nowadays. Right?
That's the exact point. So I fully agree with you and also with Kelly on that. And this works if both sides of that conversation are willing to continue the dialogue to find acceptable common ground, which for more and more people seems to be a very hard thing to do, because they'd rather be right than be in agreement with someone.
Right. They'd rather be right than happy.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So PC or Mac, I don't care. Political correctness.
See your Mac.
Watch your words is what we can tell you, and be okay with being told that your words may have hit the wrong note, because you might sound very harmonious and very educated to yourself as you listen to yourself talk about the things that you know so much about. and maybe you sound really weird and dissonant and insulting to others. And as long as we don't harmonize better, we will not resolve these issues. And political correctness may be a tool for us to, I don't know, edit ourselves in advance, and not always will it work. So sometimes we'll hit the wrong notes, and probably have done so here in this program, even today or in the past. Call us out on it. Let's have a conversation around this. We're humble enough and vulnerable enough to admit that we goofed, and we want to learn from you. And we hope that you're ready to learn from those who may know a thing or two about things you're interested in. So with that, I'm going to go about my politically semi-correct day. What about you, Brett?
Me too. Full day ahead. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And if you're watching the replay, please, yes, add your comments and questions. We would love to hear from you, especially on this subject. It's a prickly one, but even the prickliest fruit are tasty. How about that?
Prickliest fruit are tasty. I'll go get my pineapple then. All right.
Okay.
Bye,
See you, mate.